Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. Our program will begin momentarily. Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. Our program will begin momentarily. As you are connecting and enjoying the conference, please be sure to use the hashtag LPC 2023 and tag National Urban League in your LPC-related social media posts on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, so we can reshare your content. Once again, please take your seats. Our program will begin momentarily. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Rhonda Spears Bell, Senior Vice President and Chief Marketing Officer of the National Urban League.
Good morning, Urban Leaguers. Good morning, Urban Leaguers. It's so good to see you bright and early this morning. As you've just heard, I am Rhonda Spears Bell. I am the Senior Vice President and Chief Marketing Officer at the National Urban League. And it is my pleasure to open our 20th Legislative Policy Conference live from the nation's capital. I want to welcome the members and friends of our Urban League family who made the trip here to Washington, D.C., as well as those of you who are joining us virtually via our live stream. Welcome. This is an exciting and pivotal time for the Urban League's ongoing policy agenda to advance equality and the principles of social justice. And we're eager to engage in high-level policy discussions with the Biden administration and legislators on both sides of the aisle. For the National Urban League movement, the Legislative Policy Conference is a call to action, a once-a-year opportunity to bring together members of Congress, elected state leaders, and community advocates to tackle policy issues that are critical to our nation's underrepresented and underserved communities. This year's convening is also a celebration and a milestone year. This is our 20th, come on somebody, say 20. This is our 20th Legislative Policy Conference, and it's also our first in-person gathering since 2019, when the onset of COVID forced us to pivot to an all-virtual format. Listen, the pandemic challenged us, but it never stopped us. On the Hill and on the ground in our communities, the National Urban League and our affiliates, the young professionals and the Guild, continue to push for our legislative agenda. So thanks to your hard work and commitment, the commitment for all of you, we're back in person. We're here in Washington, and we are stronger than ever. I said we're stronger than ever. There you go, there you go. Rest assured, this year's LPC features a stacked slate of programs and powerful guest speakers, panelists, and presenters, and we'll get to all of that in just a moment. First, however, let's take a moment to acknowledge our dedicated and generous event sponsor, Johnson & Johnson. Here with a special, there you go. Give it up for Johnson & Johnson. Here with a special video message is the Head of Government Affairs, North America for Johnson & Johnson, Courtney Billington.
"2020 pushed communities to the edge. People took to the streets to address racism.
We endured 80 years of Jim Crow, redlining, American soldiers that came home that couldn't get the GI Bill.
And health inequities were plain to see.
This is the stress of racism on top of all the other stressors they're dealing with, because the research finds that populations of color, low in income, low in wealth, all of these stressors combine to impact health and make us much more vulnerable to disease.
At J&J, we committed to our race to health equity, known as Orthy.
Johnson & Johnson has committed to eliminate health inequities for people of color.
To strive to ensure that the color of your skin does not determine the quality of your care. To address systemic health inequities that BIPOC communities face that are both historic and ever-present. There has been real progress made, and much work is still to be done.
We want justice for Black people!
This is why our race to health equity matters.
Good morning. Well, I tell you, last night at the recognition reception, opening up this National Urban League Legislative Policy Conference was a phenomenal start. I not only learned that urban leaguers make significant impact in our communities across the country, but they also have a great time recognizing the good works and having fun together. So thank you for letting us be a part of that. As mentioned, I'm Courtney Billington, the Head of Government Affairs for North America. This 20th National Urban League Legislative Policy Conference. Over these last 2 decades, the great work that's been done together, bringing together leaders throughout our community represented here with policymakers here in Washington, D.C., is a tremendous recipe for success. I'd be remiss if I didn't also take note of a special recognition for 20 years as well, and that is the anniversary of Mark Morial as the leader of this great organization. Mark's tireless leadership has just been an example for all to follow. From introducing the Equity Index to the National Urban League's State of Black America report early in his tenure, to also shedding light on the needs of Black America. During the most recent and ongoing COVID-19 crisis, Mark has been critical and a powerful leader, jumping at every opportunity to create empowerment, equity, and access for Black Americans across the country. Please join me in congratulating and thanking Mark Morial for his leadership. Creating real equity and access cannot just happen in a vacuum. It's about activation, collaboration, and bringing as many groups together as possible to bridge gaps in background and thought for actionable impact. There is no other organization that does it better than the Urban League. And that is what opportunities like this year's annual Legislative Policy Conference is able to do. As we meet this week together and we meet with members of the administration, members of Congress, we can set the slate for policies that will make impacts not only this year, but for years to come. We know that systemic racism negatively impacts access to care, quality of care, and health outcomes for Black, Indigenous people of color. More specifically, we know that these inequities in social determinants of health mean that Black Americans suffer from a higher rate of diseases such as atrial fibrillation, lung cancer, obesity, and colorectal cancer. It is our desire at Johnson & Johnson to create a world where the color of your skin or your zip code does not determine your access or quality of care. Guided by our credo, Johnson & Johnson launched the program that you saw in the video, our Race to Health Equity, a $100 million initiative that focuses on eradicating racial and social injustice as a public health threat by eliminating health inequities for people of color. First, it means building a diverse healthcare workforce to cultivate innovative and inclusive solutions. We understand more than anyone the importance of providing culturally competent care, which can only happen by increasing the racial and ethnic diversity of healthcare talent and of the workforce to ensure an equitable point of care experience for every single patient. I heard examples of that last night from the great work that has been done around the country. I was talking with one of the urban leaguers, Ina, who had mentioned about a great program that you were doing with regards to vaccines, and I know the impact that made on our community, so thank you. Second, we must invest and support care models and solutions that drive healthier outcomes for our communities. We're expanding access to affordable, community-centric care through investments in community health centers and community health workers. These organizations and community health workers play a key role in helping to support communities of colors to access and engage in life-saving care and treatments. And finally, it means creating enduring alliances, like this partnership that we have with the National Urban League that started more than 50 years ago when Harold Sims, who was the former National Urban League acting director after the untimely passing of Whitney Young. Harold Sims joined Johnson & Johnson as our Vice President of Corporate Affairs. Within Johnson & Johnson, Harold inspired change within J&J and within the communities that we serve. His legacy still lives on. We've come a long way, but there is so much more work to be done. And we know better than anyone it cannot be done alone. Our nation's first black president, Barack Obama, once said, "One voice can change a room, and if one voice can change a room, then it can change a city. And if it can change a city, it can change a state. And if it can change a state, it can change a nation. And if it can change a nation, it can change the world." Your voice, the National Urban League, we thank you for being a group of change makers who help to continue to change the world. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Courtney and J&J. Give him another round of applause. We thank you for your partnership. Okay. Next on the program, it says that I'm supposed to introduce the National Urban League's distinguished President and CEO, Mark Morial, to present opening remarks. Well, I'm going to take a little personal privilege here. And we're going to take a little detour from our scheduled proceedings for a special presentation. And here to do the honors is a longtime friend of the Urban League and great example of social conscious and civic advocacy. Please welcome to the stage the President and CEO of the National Coalition on Black Civic Participation and convener of the Black Women's Roundtable. Please give it up for our friend, our sister, Melanie Campbell.
You know when you get somebody like, we got him. Thank you, Rhonda. Thank you for the privilege of being able to just surprise my brother. And y'all know I say it all the time, and I mean it to the bottom of my heart. My brother from another brother, Mark Morial. 20 years, my brother. I remember when we were up there at Harvard together, and you were running for the president of the Alphas. And then you told me, no, I changed my mind. I'm be the president of the National Urban League as president CEO. And I tell you, it has been an honor to be working beside you and all of Urban League family over this time. So I was just so thrilled. Traffic was messing me up this morning, but I got here. So I'm going to be obedient because I know you have a long program. So good morning to the Urban League family and guests. I'm very, very happy and honored to be here. As Rhonda mentioned, this is the Urban League's 20th Annual Legislative Policy Conference. Give yourselves a hand. And you already know that this is our leader, my friend, my brother, Mark Morial's 20th anniversary, leading the National Urban League. Can we stand up for that? After 20 years, the list of achievements and innovations that Mark has brought to the National Urban League is long. But this legislative policy conference that you all are convening today is emblematic of his transformational leadership. Just a few weeks after taking office, in his first State of the Urban League keynote address at the conference in Pittsburgh, I was there, Mark laid out a bold 5-point empowerment agenda that would come to define the next 2 decades of civil rights leadership. These 5 points now stand enshrined as the National Urban League's 5 pillars: jobs and economic empowerment, education and youth development, health and quality of life, housing and community development, justice and civic engagement. Mark was the first elected official to lead the National Urban League. And let's just say it really, really shows. And I'm in the room to tell you that it matters having Mark's voice and that history, having been able to understand police reform because you've had to deal with it as an example. He has brought an unprecedented political savvy and deep comprehension of the inner workings of government, not just to the Urban League, but the entire 21st century civil rights movement. He has united and galvanized what we now call the Big Eight, legacy civil rights organizations, to amplify our voices and broaden our influence. In that prophetic speech in Pittsburgh 20 years ago, Mark said we must enthusiastically embrace our heritage as a civil rights organization that promotes racial justice, from employment to police violence, from redistricting issues to racial profiling. Mark marshaled the forces that mobilized to defeat the lynching brute Jim Crow, to battle his treacherous gerrymandering son, James Crow. Can I get an amen? Esquire. And now stands just as defiantly against his tiki torch carrying grandson, whom Mark has named Jimmy Crow. But singing Mark's praises here on this platform that he built with his own two hands feels a lot like preaching to the choir. I am honored and proud to present this Vanguard Award to my brother, your leader, our leader, my friend, the ultimate Vanguard, my brother, Mark H. Morial. Mark.
Losing my steps. Usually I can figure out when somebody's trying to pull something on me, but this is the second time I have been tricked in the last 60 or so days, because in December, Michelle says she had been planning all year for her double nickel birthday party and said, you have to be there. And so we traveled down to South Florida for what I believe was going to be her birthday party. And when we showed up at her birthday party, it was a surprise party for me. And I had no idea. This morning I said, Melanie, good to see you. Let me put you on the program. She says, no, that's okay. Let me thank Melanie Campbell for coming this morning. Really appreciate you. My sister, we go all the way back as young activists in the 1980s working on democracy and voting issues. Melanie, thank you for your friendship and for our continued work together. So, ladies and gentlemen, Urban Leaguers, good morning. Good morning. Say Urban League. Urban League. Say Urban League. Urban League. Say Urban League fights. Urban League fights. Urban League fights. And everybody say, for you, for me, for our seniors, for our young people, for jobs, for justice, for schools, for health, and for our democracy. Give yourselves a big round of applause. Let me take a few moments this morning to once again welcome all of you here. And we have a streaming audience, so we're going to give the streaming audience a big round of applause. Thank you, streaming audience, for joining this morning. And I want to thank all of the affiliate leaders. I think we have 50 plus affiliate leaders who've taken time out of demanding schedules. So affiliate leaders, give a wave, wave your hand. Let's give all our affiliate leaders a big round of applause. We have a great number of guilders and young professionals here. If you all would give a wave, our strong volunteers here in large numbers. And we have several affiliate board members, board chairs who are here. If you all would give a wave as well, we appreciate your participation and presence. And I want to say thank you to the National Urban League staff team who works hard every day. You all give a wave. Thank you all for your work and diligence in connection with this. And so we're going to have a conversation this morning about jobs and also about health. And we've got some distinguished panelists to be with us. But let me just take a few minutes to maybe re-amplify a few things that have been said. And it bears being burned into our thought and our consciousness. 20 years ago, when we first arrived for the first Legislative Policy Conference in Washington, D.C., it was, for the Urban League, a bit of an innovation. And that innovation was the idea that we would bring the movement to Washington to meet with members of Congress and members of the executive branch. One experienced CEO told me at the time, he said, I don't need to go to Washington to talk to my member of Congress. I'll see them when they come home. And I said, who is your member? I said, your member is a specialist in playing uptown and praying downtown. He's telling you one thing at home, and he's doing another thing in Washington, D.C. We're going to be a little bit more sophisticated on my watch. We're going to go and proverbially, in a diplomatic way, get in their face. And we're going to meet them, because I can tell you, as an elected official, when constituents come to see you, and they come prepared, and they have a list of asks, and they're familiar, the elected official takes note. We needed to change the paradigm about how we wanted to influence decision-making here in Washington, D.C. And we took the tact that every affiliate delegation would include the affiliate CEO, a young professional, a guilder, and the chairperson of the board. The vision was to show that the Urban League movement was made up both of paid, experienced professionals and volunteers from multiple generations. We wanted that snapshot to be in the minds of elected officials. And then we additionally said that every delegation would meet with their own member of Congress, be they friend or frenemy, be they aligned or unaligned, because we're here to educate people about our agenda. We're here to talk about what we are for. We're here to talk to those who are already converted to our agenda, but we want to persuade and convince others to embrace our agenda. And that was the model of the Legislative Policy Conference, for us to be armed with an agenda. We don't walk in just to say hello. We don't walk in to just kiss an elected official's ring. We don't just walk in to hear what they have to say. We walk in armed with our agenda, the things we want them to do to impact our community. And that's been the spirit of this Legislative Policy Conference. So we're here for serious business, here to press our cause. Over the years, there have been times when there's been receptivity. There's been time when there's been hostility. It's never easy, but we say we will never be out of sight because we'll never want to be out of mind. We're always going to be present and accounted for. And if we have to run with the wind at our back, we'll run with the wind at our back. If we have to run with the wind in our face, we'll run with the wind at our face. And we have no permanent friends, no permanent enemies. We only have permanent interest. And that is what this Legislative Policy Conference is indeed all about. Let me take a minute because we were last in Washington, D.C. in 2019. And you remember 2019. It was just after Charlottesville. It was an environment of hostility and ridicule. It was an environment of great difficulty for our agenda items, but we were here. In the 4 years that have elapsed, the country has navigated through extreme crises. One, the coronavirus pandemic, which cost this nation 1 million lives, which disproportionately impacted our community. But it bears worth saying that I am so proud that no Urban League affiliate shut down, that no Urban League affiliate stopped providing services, that no Urban League affiliate fell asleep on the watch. To the contrary, and in the alternative, you stepped up. You stepped up and provided food for the food insecure. You provided access to PPE equipment to people in our community. You assisted people who had lost their jobs in enrolling for benefits. You helped others find new employment even though it was on a temporary basis. You became a safe haven for kids to be able to access broadband and do their homework. You stepped up in city after city to respond to the crisis. And we mobilized. We mobilized to say to the Congress and to say to the President, and we mobilized to say, you must respond by giving a lifeline to communities. You must respond by standing up quickly, a vaccine to protect us. You must respond and recognize the disproportionality of the pandemic. And then that fateful day in May of 2020, when we turned on our televisions and we saw this black man named George Floyd with in the prone position with Officer Chauvin's knee on his neck, but with citizens, including an EMT and others, pleading with the officers for the man's life, asking them, if you watch that film, what are you doing? An EMT from the Minneapolis Fire Department who was there, ready, willing, and able to provide intervention, and denied. And the courage of a young woman with a 21st century innovation called an iPhone, who captured that event so that the entire world could see. 10 years earlier, 20 years earlier, if that had occurred, we would have heard conflicting stories. We would have heard that George Floyd grabbed my gun, that George Floyd resisted arrest, that George Floyd was high as a kite on substances. We'd have heard a fictional account, and we'd have heard conflicting accounts. Instead, we saw and we needed no interpretation. But what was remarkable about that moment is that the world responded in a fashion that even those of us who are on the front line in civil rights and social justice had never seen. There needed to be no organization for there to be marches and protests. People responded organically. They responded with passion. They responded in cities and suburbs and rural areas. They responded in New Zealand and Germany. They responded in the hood and in the residential districts. And they responded of all creeds, colors, and religions with outrage about that death. All of this has occurred since we were here in person last. And it triggered a consciousness movement in this country. It led to an engineered, if you will, a political shift, where for the first time in American history, we had a president stand up and very explicitly, without any spin or varnish, say, my administration is going to confront racial justice. My administration is going to make racial equity a guiding principle of the work that we do. And so we're here today at this moment. And I want the affiliate leaders and the Urban League movement and the world to know this Urban League movement is bigger and better and stronger and more passionate and more ready and better equipped to lead than ever before. And we don't say that, we say that, and we also say it is on the shoulders of Whitney Young. It is on the shoulders of Vernon Jordan. It is on the shoulders of John Mack and Jim Compton. It is on the shoulders of George Edmund Haynes and Ruth Standish Baldwin. It is on the shoulders of John Lewis and Martin Luther King and Malcolm X and Fannie Lou Hamer and Dorothy Height. It is on their shoulders that we stand. It is on the shoulders of the Kennedy brothers. It is on the shoulders of activists and electeds and presidents like Johnson who push this agenda. It is on their shoulders that we stand. But as we stand on those shoulders, we are building strong shoulders so that the next generation can stand on our shoulders. So we come with our backs held straight. We will not equivocate 1 inch towards anyone that attacks the teaching of our history in their schools. We will not compromise on basic principles like the protection of American democracy and our right to vote. We will never stop fighting to ensure that prosperity replaces poverty in our communities. And we will never give in and give up on our work and our effort to be the strongest civil rights mission-built organization when it comes to providing high-quality, effective, direct services to our community. So today, as we have this discussion, I am energized, as I hope you all are. And I know that for the affiliate leaders, it can get weary. Your feet can get tired. Your spirit can sometimes be challenged. But what I want you to know, I don't care how hard it gets. I don't care how difficult it is. I want to tell you a story about Henry Box Brown. Have you ever heard of Henry Box Brown? Henry Box Brown was an enslaved man who desired to be free. He came up with an innovative way to gain his freedom. He put himself in a wooden box, and that box was sealed shut. And he had that box shipped from somewhere down in Virginia all the way to the American Anti-Slavery Society in Philadelphia. So for more than 30 hours, he was crunched up in that box. Crunched up in that box. No food, no water, barely able to breathe, not knowing whether the box would get thrown off the boat into the water or whether along the way someone would become suspicious and open it and he would be beaten. And he endured that journey the same way Harriet Tubman endured that journey, back and forth through swamps and snakes. She didn't have an iPhone to check in. She didn't have a GPS to guide her way. So however difficult it is for us, think about the travails of people of that generation, or of our mothers and fathers and grandfathers in the South who lived behind the walls of segregation. No. Think about the courage of those that fought and battled in the times of those circumstances. Think about the sacrifices that our allies made in many instances. I don't care how hard it gets. I don't care how weary we feel. I don't care if our feet are tired. We're at a point now where nothing we endure are we not equipped to endure. And nothing we endure matches the struggles and the sacrifices of those that helped us get to where we are. So we have to remain energized. And we have to fight and continue to work. So you all ready for a discussion? Okay, let's get the show on the road. Our first speaker, and I'm going to tell you there's been a transformation at the United States Department of Commerce and a real willingness in a profound way to make racial equity an important part of the jobs and economic future of the country. But it is being steered by a group of professionals who are in leadership positions at the Department of Commerce, who know, understand, and are part of our community. So I'm proud to introduce the Assistant Secretary for the EDA, the Economic Development Agency, and she is Alejandra Castillo, and she is a fierce sister and a great friend of the Urban League, and she's going to share with you some updates and some perspectives. Ladies and gentlemen, please greet Alejandra Castillo.
Good morning. You know, I feel as if I'm at home. I'm at home with seeing my friend Melanie Campbell, who's surprised us, but she's been a partner as well. And to Mark Morial, 20 years at the helm of the National Urban League. Congratulations, Mark. I know that your leadership, your vision, your tireless work has truly been transformational. And I met you, you may not remember, but I met you when you were mayor. I was working for Barry McCaffrey at the time. And it was many, many moons ago, but it's been fabulous to be part of this journey, part of this community. So, as Mark said, I have the great fortune of serving once again for a president. I've served 3 presidents, but it has been incredible to serve President Biden in this position as the Assistant Secretary for Economic Development. But I'll also tell you, it's wonderful to also serve alongside an incredible individual as Don Cravens. It's the joy of coming to work knowing that we are partners in all good. It's the joy of being able to come to the Department of Commerce with a lens of what our community needs, how we not only talk about social determinants of health, but we also talk about social determinants of wealth, how we talk about, but not just talk about. It's not about talk, it's about doing. And I will tell you, in almost 3 decades serving in Washington, D.C., I can tell you to my bone that this is the first time I've truly seen diversity, equity, and inclusion being done at the highest levels of government. President Biden, as you know, did the first executive order of his administration, which was the executive order on advancing racial equity and supporting underserved communities. And then he again, very recently, in February 16, issued a second executive order. And let me tell you, we have been taking that executive order to heart. At EDA, one of the first things we did was we revisited our investment priorities, making equity at the top. And why is that important? That's important because it determines how the dollars are being pushed out. It determines how we make decisions. It determines the data that we use in order to make sure that these dollars are reaching the communities most in need. So I'm going to very quickly tell you, because I could talk about commerce for days on end, but I'm going to tell you about 4 pieces of legislation which I'm sure you already know, but it's worth repeating. The American Rescue Plan, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, the CHIPS and Science Act, and the Inflation Reduction Act. When you take those 4 pieces of legislation, first of all, it is historic in their nature, it is historic in their impact, it is historic that a president was able to get these 4 pieces of legislation done in his first 2 years in office. And what does that mean for us? That means $2.4 trillion. $2.4 trillion. And Mark, you're absolutely right. The last time we all gathered in person in 2019, it was a different world. Yes, there was anxiety, despair, there was a looming pandemic. But now we're turning the corner. We're turning the corner because this is the time of not just hope, which is important, but it is the time of transformational change. You are seeing out of the Department of Commerce, and I know that my colleague Don Cravens will talk to you more about it, but you're seeing from the National Telecommunication and Information Agency, NTIA, $48 billion going out to broadband to make sure that all communities have broadband, because we know and we saw how the pandemic impacted our communities, where our kids had to be, going to parking lots, where our elderlies could not get their telemedicine, where our businesses could not have e-commerce. So not only are you seeing broadband, but you're also seeing out of EDA, $3 billion that went out under the American Rescue Plan. And I know that National Urban League affiliates were part of those consortiums that went after those grants. But I also want to talk to you about 2 new programs that EDA has. And I was reminding Mark Morial that back in 2017, I served under the Obama administration, and I wrote an article for the State of Black America, talking about technology and innovation, how important it is for our communities to be in that space. So now the time has come. Under the CHIPS and Science Act, there's a program called Tech Hubs, which was authorized at $10 billion. It was appropriated at half a billion dollars. There's a bit of a discrepancy there. But it was a down payment. And we're taking it as a down payment to create a new program which is going to democratize technology and innovation. And Tech Hubs is that vehicle. And I want to not just talk to you today, but I also want your help. We have put out a request for information, what's called in government speak RFI. And we're asking you all to give us your best ideas, your best practices. How should we design Tech Hubs? What are the ingredients that need to be in place in order for Tech Hubs to truly not only be successful, but to ensure that all our communities are involved in this process? So Tech Hub right now, it's live. You can Google it. Send us your best ideas. The due date for that is March 16. There's another program that was appropriated at $200 million, which is called Recompete. And Recompete is focusing on highly distressed communities. Highly distressed communities. And there again, we are asking you for your best ideas. How do we not only engage highly distressed communities, but how do we bring back that economic fabric to make sure that not only are we creating jobs, but we're creating the businesses, that we're creating the ecosystem for communities that have been long forgotten to have a chance at this moment in time. So that again, there's a request for information, and I really, really hope that all of you, either individually or together, give us your best ideas. You see, right now, as I mentioned, $2.4 trillion. The entire economic landscape is changing. It's changing before our eyes. And we need to be at the table, not just at the beginning, in the middle, and at the end, completely throughout this entire process, because the rules of engagement are being developed right now. The rules of engagement for the next 50 to 100 years are being developed right now. They're being designed right now. And we are fortunate enough to have individuals like Don Graves, who's our Deputy Secretary at Commerce, to have Don Cravens, to have so many individuals at the Department of Commerce who are advocating and making sure that equity is at the core. So if this doesn't excite you, I don't know what will. It is an exciting time. It is an exciting time, but we need to be mindful and watchful and thoughtful because policy matters. Policy matters. And the people who are at the helm developing these policies matter as well. And I cannot tell you how we need your talent, we need your voices, we need your zeal. As you go up on the Hill, I do have an ask. You know, the Economic Development Administration has not seen this type of funding in a very long time. In a very long time. And we're doing as much as possible to make sure that these dollars are reaching you. Now, we do not invest in individual or private companies, but we invest, as I said before, in creating the ecosystem. So we invest in communities, we invest with nonprofits, we invest with working closely with mayors. But as you go up on the Hill, I do have a special request, and that is EDA has not been reauthorized in over 18 years. And why is that important as we speak to National Urban Leaguers? Because the tools that we have to address the challenges of the 21st century date back to maybe when you had a beeper. I put it to you in those terms because I want you to understand. I want you to understand how out of date we are, how we need to have modern tools to truly go into those communities, our communities, and address years and decades of disinvestments. So as you speak to members of Congress, put a little plug in their ear. We need to reauthorize EDA. We need to have those tools to make sure that we're going not only superficially in communities, but that we're going deep, that we're able to change those paradigms that Mark mentioned. So again, I'm excited. I am in the trenches with people who have my back, and for that I am forever grateful, because this is a fight. This is a fight to make sure that $2.4 trillion that are changing the face of our economy are done and in benefit of communities of color, particularly African American communities. So with that, I thank you. And I also want to make sure that you're going to respond to that RFI, because if your voices are not heard, if your voices are not recorded, if we don't have those letters of support or sometimes of criticism, we can't serve you. And that is the best joy I could ever have, to be able to serve my community. Thank you so much.
Give Alejandra another round of applause. Thank you for clarity and a pathway to opportunity. We come to get information and to get guidance on how we can continue to pursue our work. At this time, this man needs no introduction at all. He is the Undersecretary for MBDA, but it bears worth mentioning. Don Cravens has had a distinguished public service career. He served as a member of the House of Representatives in the state of Louisiana. He served as a member of the Senate in the state of Louisiana. Before that, he was SGA president at Louisiana State University. And then after that, he became the staff director of the Senate Small Business Committee, one of only a handful of African Americans who's ever been a chief of staff in the United States Senate. He's done two tours of duty at the National Urban League, and maybe there's a third one in the future. And he is now, of course, spearheading the work of the Biden administration when it comes to black business and minority business growth and development. Ladies and gentlemen, our friend and brother, Don Cravens.
Good morning. It's so good to be home. And it's so good to see all of you. Even as I take my glasses off, I can make most of you out. First of all, let me thank President Morial and congratulate him on his leadership and as we celebrate his 20 years. But you know, this event really is the hallmark of much of his leadership. This has always been a very important event to him and his team and to his family. And I'm just very honored that I had a piece of this event as the executive director of the Washington Bureau, and equally honored to be here today to talk to you. I knew I was following Alejandra Castillo, Ms. Deputy Secretary, and I followed her a couple of times, and it's tough because Alejandra has worked at Commerce before, so she gets all the 13 bureaus. She can tell you where the money is. I'm 4 or 5 months in, right? And so she doesn't know this, but I had our speechwriters get together. And I said to my guy, I said, Jackson, find out what the assistant secretary is talking about so I can focus on my remarks, you know, a little bit more carefully so I don't repeat. And I never will be able to say the things she said the way she said it. She is just a tremendous asset to our country. She didn't say this, but during President Obama's term, she served as national director of the Minority Business Development Agency. That's where we know her from, right? And it's because of her and the shoes that I walk in that I'm able to do my job. And so, as she said, we work very closely together. I want to just say good morning to all of our affiliate CEOs. It is so good to see you, brothers and sisters. I want to say good morning to our, and your staffs. I don't want to forget about the staffs. I want to say good morning to all of our young professionals. Good to see all of you. Some of you transitioned from young professionals. The last one's the last time I saw you. And you joined us with the Guild. Where are my Guilders? Good to see you. I know we've got some board members as well, and so I just want to congratulate the staff. And I know how much work goes into this wonderful event. And so I want to first just thank the New York staff who helped the Washington Bureau make this event possible, especially that we stole Cara Morris and brought her to the Department of Commerce as well. But I also want to congratulate Yvette and the entire Bureau staff. I'm getting older. I don't know as many of them as I did. I see Angela's here, who I worked with in the Senate, and Tony Wiley, who's still here, our Senior Director of Advocacy. But yes, but it's good to see you. You know, 6 years ago when I proudly served as the executive director of the Washington Bureau, it was on a Tuesday morning just like this when we were on Capitol Hill, and I did a presentation at our opening plenary remark, and it was called Congressional Landscape. Does anybody remember that? And we talked about the landscape in Congress and why it was important, and we set out a roadmap at that time for the Urban League as we were advocating to Congress that it was finally time for our leadership to really invest in America. We were proudly following in the footsteps of Whitney Young. We were proudly following in the footsteps of John Jacob. Whitney Young called for a domestic Marshall Plan. Mr. Jacob called for a Main Street Marshall Plan. And Mark, with his leadership, we were again calling for a real investment in our communities. And we actually put it here. It's called the Main Street Marshall Plan, From Poverty to Prosperity. Our plan called for a forward-leaning investment of trillions of dollars for physical infrastructure, for such things as roads and bridges, buildings, and for resources for human development such as education, job training, and health insurance. We said in this document, the Main Street Marshall Plan is aimed not only at combating poverty, but at promoting equality and eliminating disparities. Our plan called for a once-in-a-generation, a once-in-a-lifetime investment in us as Americans. Well, you just heard Assistant Secretary Castillo speak. Ladies and gentlemen, thanks to the leadership of President Biden and Vice President Harris, thanks to bipartisan members of Congress, we got our Main Street Marshall Plan. You all here and back home helped convince members of Congress that it was time to pass a bipartisan infrastructure investment in our communities. So successful you were that the President of the United States thanked you personally yesterday. Now, I got to tell you, I was a little jealous of that. We never got the President when I was doing policy conference, Mark. But that's a testament to your leadership and to your advocacy. I used to tell this to Rhonda. We move so quickly at the Urban League. You move so quickly. We take up wins and we keep moving, and we don't sometimes just appreciate and enjoy the successes that we have already achieved. We got our Main Street Marshall Plan. What this plenary session should be about, what this one should be about, is the new landscape that you should all be thinking about. What is next for us to work on? You've heard from the Assistant Secretary. You will hear from these two wonderful Deputy Secretaries who are going to join us about the trillions of dollars that are being invested into our communities. Now that the resources have been invested, they've been committed, the money's there, what do you do next to bridge the gaps? What are you going to do to make sure that people of color, black folks, have an opportunity to truly participate in this infrastructure? We don't want to just drive on new bridges. We don't want to just drive electric vehicles. We want to design the bridges. We want to build the bridges. We want to design the electric vehicles. We want to own the charging stations for those vehicles. We don't want just the benefits of infrastructure, of this Main Street Marshall Plan. We want to deliver the benefits of the Main Street Marshall Plan. The landscape, ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, that you should be focusing on at this policy conference is how do we ensure that that happens? That is our new landscape. That is the landscape you should work on, this equity landscape, as the Assistant Secretary said, as the President probably told you yesterday. Now, I have some good news, because it is tough work, but I've got some good news. Thanks to the leadership of the President and, again, bipartisan members of Congress, we've got some new tools in our arsenal. We've got some new arrows that we can use. Thanks to you and your advocacy, on pages 5 and 6, I was reading that this morning at 4 o'clock this morning. I couldn't sleep because I was so excited to see you. Pages 5 and 6 of this plan. Let me remind you what was on pages 5 and 6. You advocated, the Urban League advocated for the existence and the funding of the Minority Business Development Agency. On page 6, you called for a promotion of entrepreneurial education programs through the MBDA and for the establishment of a permanent small business technical assistance fund for minority small businesses so they could receive the assistance they need. So thanks to you, ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, after 53 years of the Minority Business Development Agency being a temporary agency, for the first time, the Minority Business Development Agency is a permanent agency with permanent funding, with our largest budget ever. And as many of you know, because you let me know you've applied, we've just launched the first of its kind $100 million program designed just for technical assistance for socially and economically disadvantaged communities. So we are designed, brothers and sisters, to play a role in this new landscape. The President made sure you had tools to make sure that we bridge the gap between commitment and results. We're the only federal agency. Our sole mission, I get to drive to the Department of Commerce every day, and my sole mission is the growth and global competitiveness of minority business enterprises. Congress has mandated that we be your voice at those tables. And as Ms. Castillo said, I am. And I'm very unapologetic about doing it. It's the only reason why I would leave the best job in the country at the National Urban League. It's the truth. But I knew it was a place I needed to be. I knew it was a place that I could make some change and some difference, and I'm not going to let you down. We don't just have a seat at the table, brothers and sisters. We're setting the menu. So now is not the time to rest. Now is not the time to chill. Now is the time to get active and to make sure that all of the effort that you have put forward, we can participate in this progress. Mark talked about it's tough sometimes. It's hard. I tell my staff sometimes I feel like Charlie Brown in the football. We just can't sometimes get over the hump, right? Like a well-written but terribly sad episode of Good Times. I just want to get out. I was going to work Good Times in this morning. But brothers and sisters, there is something different. And Alejandra talked about it. There is something different with this administration. And you're going to hear from some other leaders in the Biden administration, and you're going to see it and you're going to feel it. There's something different. Help us help you. Help us be your voice at MBDA. That is our sole job. Mark, I'm going to just ask for 1 minute of personal privilege. We would not be a permanent agency without the efforts of one staffer who worked tirelessly while she was at MBDA. Young woman, knowledgeable woman, an urban leaguer before, and just happens to be an urban leaguer today. And because of her efforts, Mark, we became a permanent agency. She earned an award when she was at MBDA, but for whatever reason, she didn't get that award. And part of the job as a leader is you have to correct wrongs and right some ships, right? And so I'm going to ask Cara Morris to come up here, and I want to ask Ms. Shayla Moon to come up. National Directors Award for 2021. This woman earned it. We are the permanent agency we are, and our loss at MBDA was the Urban League's gain. But Shayla, we wanted to just say thank you, and we love you. Thank you, thank you.
See why we miss Don Cravens, huh? Let's give him another round of applause. Don Cravens, talented, and Alejandra Castillo, they both have to get back to the department. We transition quickly to a discussion of housing, central to the work of the National Urban League. And in the middle 1960s, when Whitney Young was our president and CEO, he was engaged by then President Johnson, who charged a man by the name of Sergeant Shriver to begin the design of what became the Great Society and anti-poverty programs. One element of that initiative was the creation of an agency that would focus on housing and the urban conditions. And the National Urban League, as we are now, then were in the room, at the table, in advocating for the creation of the Department of Housing and Urban Development, which when it was stood up, became the first cabinet agency to focus on urban conditions, and these are the 1960s. The riots or the uprising in Watts had just occurred. The focus on systemic disparities in economics, the declining conditions of housing were on the table. And that agency was led by Robert Weaver, the first black man to serve as a cabinet officer in the history of the United States. President Johnson appointed the first black person to the cabinet. He also appointed the first black person to the United States Supreme Court in Thurgood Marshall. Today, the Department of Housing and Urban Development is led in the top two spots by two dynamic sisters, two dynamic women. Our good friend and former Congress member from the state of Ohio, Marcia Fudge, is the secretary of the Department of Housing and Urban Development, and we've had many discussions with her. This morning, she's dispatched her number two, her deputy secretary, Adrienne Todman, another sister who's been a great friend for years and a great champion for equity in housing. So ladies and gentlemen, urban leaguers, please greet the Deputy Secretary of HUD, Adrienne Todman.
morning. It's good to see everyone and to be here. At first, like to thank my good friend, President Morial, for that warm welcome, but also, has it only been 20 years? It feels like it was just yesterday when you took the helm, and you have done a phenomenal job. I know it's going to be a good Sunday talk show or a good moment on cable TV whenever I hear Mark being introduced to talk about the topics and issues happening across this country. So thank you, sir, for your leadership and for being strong and true. Appreciate it. Thank you, Mark. And I also want to thank the Urban League for the work that you are doing. The Urban League, of course, is no stranger to HUD and vice versa. You all carry out so much of what is core to HUD's mission to make sure that people across the country, particularly Black people across the country, have the best information and access to homeownership and community development. So it is an honor to be here with you today and to bring greetings from our fabulous and fierce Secretary, Marcia Fudge, who brings you her greetings. You know, it was wonderful to hear from my colleagues at the Commerce Department, and they are right, that while HUD's mission from inception, and I will say about that, every morning when I walk into the HUD building, there is a bust of Secretary Weaver right there in the lobby. Most people don't notice it, but it's right there. And whenever I go past, you know, I look at it and say, I hope we're doing you proud, Secretary, for the vision that you had for this department so many decades ago. But it was great to hear from my colleagues in Commerce, because Commerce has not always been known as being down with the people. And it's been extraordinary working with my fellow Deputy Secretary there, Don Graves. We call him the two Dons, Don, to see how well they're leading that department into the future on behalf of our community. So it's great to have a moment with them, and great to see my fellow Deputy Secretary from HHS here as well. So I'm going to talk to you about three things. First, what is HUD doing to help keep people housed and to continue the dream of helping folks get into homeownership? What we are doing in terms of helping communities with their economic development, and very importantly, what are we doing to protect the rights and opportunities of Black and brown people across this country? I'll begin with what I think is important, because it's critical to me that we understand how far we've come in the past 2 years. There's a lot of work that HUD and our partners at Treasury did to do something as simple as try to keep people in their homes. With the past 2 years we had. So many people suffered. So many people lost their jobs. So many people couldn't pay their rent, still can't pay their rent. So many people could not pay their mortgage. And I will say, with my back held straight, that it was because of the actions of this administration, Secretary Fudge, Secretary Yellen, who made sure that millions of Americans did not lose their apartments and did not lose their homes as homeowners. And what does that mean? We spent billions of dollars to make sure that rent was paid. At HUD, which many of you are familiar with, our FHA program, we made sure that if you were struggling and you couldn't pay your mortgage, that you could enter forbearance. And then what we did, we took it one step closer. We created something that we call a loss mitigation waterfall. And those of you who are doing housing counseling, I know that I'm preaching to the choir, but the loss mitigation waterfall, and what that does is say, hey, if you are making less money or no money and you're struggling to still keep your home, you are able to restructure your mortgage debt. And then what we did is we decoupled that from having folks, tying it to folks having lost their income due to the pandemic. And just a couple weeks ago, under the Secretary's leadership, we made it that you could access this loss mitigation waterfall no matter what created the economic shock in your household. And we are very proud of that work. The Secretary announced a couple weeks ago that we helped keep 2 million homeowners in their home, and I will say that is worth a round of applause. And we went further. Many folks are familiar with the voucher program. This program has not been expanded since the last time I was at HUD, which was in the late 90s. And it was through this administration that we were able to get another 100,000 brand new vouchers on the street. Now, it's a small number, and we know we need more, and maybe that's part of the call to action I'll give you at the end here, but we know we need more. But this is the first time, and I've been around affordable housing programs for 30 years more, this is the first time that the voucher program, which we understand the impact that has to our very low-income brothers and sisters across the country, the first time it's been expanded since the 90s. And so we have tens of thousands of folks right now who are able to find a home, find a better home, and to afford their home in a way that brings dignity and hope to them and their children. You know, homeownership is critical to the Secretary's vision in the role that HUD plays. And in addition to making sure that we had the opportunity to keep people in their homes, we have been working very hard to make sure that we are lowering barriers to folks to access homeownership, particularly our first-time homeowners. One of the things that the Vice President announced just a couple weeks ago is the reduction in something called our MIP, our Mortgage Insurance Premium, which is a sort of a HUD geek thing. It's a fee. It's a fee that is applied to access FHA insurance model, and to be able, and you know, it's a fee that's applied at the upfront cost. And this has not been done but one other time in the history of HUD. And the last time it happened, it didn't stick. So this is a moment in history that our secretary and the vice president came together and said, we have to cut the cost for first-time, particularly first-time homeowners, to reduce the MIP. I won't tell you the difficulty it took for us to get there, but we did that. And thank you for making sure that as you're doing your housing counseling work, you are able to use that as a tool in your toolkit to demonstrate to first-time homeowners the opportunities and the cost reductions that this administration is bringing. We're also doing things like recalculating the way we look at student debt. We know that so many of our younger Americans, I'm no longer one of those younger Americans, are looking for their first home, and we know that student debt has been a barrier. And so one of the things that we did was we calculated how we look at student debt, no longer using an average, but actually using the actual student debt that someone carries, which we see has created opportunities for individuals. We're also allowing our lenders to include positive rental history. To use, yep, folks are shaking their head, you understand what that means. Positive rental history toward their ability at looking at their access to home ownership and to use HUD's tool. And we consider that to be an act of history as well. We are doing as much as we can, and there's still more to do as we try to make sure that folks are able to live the American dream. One of the other things that we're doing is once people have a home, you know, we are ensuring that we are creating additional opportunities to grow that generational wealth. Something that should be no surprise to this crowd is that when someone has a home in a black neighborhood, their homes are typically appraised at roughly 20% less than if their home is in a white neighborhood. And when our secretary shared that bit of information with the president and vice president, they said, well, we can't have that. And so the president established with Secretary Fudge and Director Susan Rice, who is the director of the Domestic Policy Council, established a task force to look specifically at appraisal bias. And they reported out just about a year ago, not just studying the decades and decades of generational wealth that's been left on the table. Think about it. Think about our grandmother's home, our great-grandmother's home. and the grandchildren today who are in those homes who have been deprived of what is due to them. And so with the Secretary's leadership and Director Rice's leadership, we have created a path forward to try to make sure that under this administration, we're doing everything we can to correct that wrong. And I encourage you to visit, thank you for that, I encourage you to visit our website to learn more. We're also looking at the unfinished work of fair housing. All of us are familiar with the Fair Housing Act and the power that it has had over these many, many years to make sure that we are addressing bad actors when they discriminate against folk. But the work of the Fair Housing Act is not complete. There's one little piece in there that's called affirmatively furthering fair housing. One little piece in there. And what that does is say, we know we have to catch bad actors and bring them to justice. But because of the hundreds of years of discrimination, this country needs to be more aspirational in correcting and looking at history to correct the wrongs. And what that phrase means in the Fair Housing Act is that cities and states and their leaders, counties and their leaders, need to be more intentional, not just in identifying bad actors, but what are the things that need to happen in that community to address the history of this country. And so many have tried to activate that piece of the Fair Housing Act. Hasn't really happened. Under President Obama's watch, there was a rule that was put out, a powerful rule, that the previous administration, I will say unsurprisingly, dismantled. Not under Secretary Fudge's watch. So we, just a couple weeks ago, put a new rule, a proposed rule out that will be challenging anybody who receives HUD funding, which is everybody, all the states, all the territories, all of our large and medium cities, and housing agencies, challenging everybody to be aspirational and to look at data, look at their communities, map the work that needs to be done, send the plan to HUD, we'll approve the plan, and then we will hold leaders accountable, with the ultimate penalty being not accessing HUD's funds at all. So I encourage you to take a look at that proposed rule. Comments are due April the 10th. It is something that I'm particularly proud of because it was an all HUD event, and we want to hear your thoughts about it. It will be groundbreaking if we're able to do this right. Third, economic development. I know many of folks here are very familiar with HUD's programs. I'm hoping that you're aware of our CDBG programs. I'm hopeful that you're aware of our Section 108, which allows localities to basically leverage their future CDBG funds and be able to get initiatives done. And it's because of programs like that I've been able to look at that money in action. I was just in Austin last week and visited get Austin in the house. All right, they'll be proud, yeah. I was in Austin just last week and was able to visit a small family-owned restaurant and see HUD's funding and programs at work. It was HUD funds that made sure that that restaurant could survive. I was in DeKalb County, and I saw what they're doing to create living centers and recreational centers for their seniors. I was also in San Francisco, which I don't have to tell you about the expense in San Francisco, but I was in San Francisco where folks were using HUD CDBG funds in order to really purchase whole buildings and almost blocks to make sure that they're protected from gentrification in the Mission District. You know, this is the work that HUD does. As I begin to close out, I'll share one more thing that HUD is working on that I think it's important for this audience to know, and that is the work that we do in disaster recovery. Many folks think about our public housing, as you should, in Section 8, and I talked about CDBG, I talked about our work with Section 108. But many folks don't know that HUD is the agency that provides billions, not millions, but billions of dollars to states and cities across the country when they are most traumatized by natural disasters, whether they be tornadoes, hurricanes, wildfires, flooding. And I think this crowd understands more than most who's most impacted when there's a natural disaster. It's black folk, it's brown folk, it's people who are low income. And the part that breaks my heart the most, it's our seniors who will stand and watch their homes be destroyed or come back home, and lifetime of love gone. I know that deeply because as a daughter of the Caribbean, I'm originally from St. Thomas in the U.S. Virgin Islands. My family's homes have been destroyed over and over again. So it's a traumatic event, not just at the individual and family level, but at the community level to come back. And I've been to more disaster areas than I care to count. But here's what I know, that HUD insists when we provide our disaster recovery funds that we are centering those people who have been most traumatized and need it the most. I encourage you, if you are in or around or have an affiliate in a disaster, presidentially declared disaster area, pay attention to what's happening to those funds. Weigh in, because we require leaders to have a strong community effort to make sure those funds are being used the right way and for the right people. I also encourage you to look at opportunities of how those funds can be leveraged to carry out some of the work that you do to help communities as well. Most folks don't talk about HUD's work that way, and that's why I want to lift it up, because this isn't millions of dollars, it's billions of dollars, and they're floating across communities as we speak. So look, you know, as I said, this is my second tour at HUD. When I was there in the 90s, there was talk about eliminating the whole department and reducing our funds. You know, we're not there anymore, but I tell you what, I don't take things for granted. Right? There are folks right now in this town who are talking about reducing our budget to historic lows. And you and I know we can't afford that, not given what HUD's mission is and its purpose. So I ask, as you are traveling the city and talking to people, remind them about HUD's mission. Remind them that we need to move forward and not backwards. Remind them that we are still owed the billions of investments that we didn't get in 2021. And I'm hopeful that as you see the president's budget when it's released this week, that we are continuing to do the work, as Mark said, to try to move folks from poverty to prosperity in the weeks, months, and years and decades to come. I want to thank you for your partnership with HUD. Thank you for everything you're doing to strengthen our communities. God bless. Stay well.
One more time for Deputy Secretary Todman. Thank you very much for those remarks. How can anybody ride the streets of America, Los Angeles or Washington or New York or New Orleans or Atlanta, and see people in tents, laying on blankets, and then talk about reducing the funding at the Department of Housing and Urban Development? Where is your compassion? Where's your sense of common sense? Some of this doesn't operate on a high intellectual plane. Some of these are not matters of sophisticated public policy. These are issues of human beings. These are issues of families and children. It pains me that I see in Los Angeles or in New York or here in Washington, D.C., men and women, not just black and Latino, but white Americans as well, living on the street on a blanket, and if you're lucky, you may have a tent. These issues stem from the long-standing 20-year underinvestment in housing, the failure to build enough affordable housing units so that people can afford them. It stems from many returning veterans from the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan returning home and facing untold post-traumatic stress syndrome, mental and emotional challenges and difficulties in transitioning. It stems from returning citizens who may find their freedom from incarceration, but no way to transition back or reunite with their families or find. So I want to define these issues where we understand these issues. We understand them as issues of people. We understand them as issues of family. So we are going to stand up to anyone that takes the scalpel to the HUD budget, and we'll fight them until hell freezes over. And then we'll fight on the ice. Before we hear from Deputy Secretary Palm, I want to do one or two things. Number one, I want to say thank you first to Judson Robinson, the CEO in Houston, who will host this summer's National Urban League Conference. We just had a powerful press conference in Houston with Mayor Sylvester Turner, members of Congress Green and Sheila Jackson Lee, with an entire community of elected officials and business leaders and community leaders and faith leaders who are uniting. Houston's promised us. Judson has put his name on the line. He said we're going to have the biggest and baddest Urban League Conference in the history of time. So thank you, Judson. Houston, here we come. And I want to thank William Barnes. I just had an opportunity to spend some time in Birmingham and late last year in Montgomery, Alabama, to witness the work occurring in Birmingham, the growth and expansion of that affiliate, and now discussions underway with Mayor Reed of Montgomery about a possible expansion into Montgomery, Alabama, which, as you know, is one of the most important cities and places for our civil rights history, the home of Rosa Parks and the Montgomery bus boycott, but also a place where the new Legacy Museum is something, colleagues, you must see. It is powerful, it is stimulating, and it is moving. So let's give Birmingham a big round of applause. I don't know if William is still in the room. Hey, there's William. Thank you. Stand up, William. Stand up real quick. William Barnes, yeah, thank you. And Judson, thank you. And then had an opportunity to visit, and this is all this year, Cincinnati, and our new colleague, Christy Kuhns. Christy, are you in the room with us? Stand up, Christy. Christy, a brand new affiliate leader, CEO, who had an opportunity to engage with us, some 90 employees, and visit the new Social Justice Center being constructed by the Cincinnati Urban League, which, as you know, has a footprint both in Cincinnati and also in the Miami Valley where Dayton is located. So thank you for hosting that visit earlier this year, and thank you for the work that you're doing. And then I had an opportunity also, first time, to visit Wilmington, North Carolina, another important city where we do not have an affiliate, at least not now, but a city with a very important civil rights history. So this opportunity I have to see the work on the ground, to meet the frontline volunteers and staff members is really one of the most important and most moving and special parts of the work I do. So I want to give all of you all a continuing round of applause, but thank you to those affiliates who've welcomed me so far this year. We move now to a discussion of health equity and health and quality of life. And certainly we want to acknowledge the powerful partnership we have with the Department of Health and Human Services They helped us stand up the largest and most significant health equity program in the history of the Urban League movement over the last 3 years, where we worked hard to help our community confront the viciousness of the coronavirus pandemic. But I'm proud, and we've had great discussions and great relationship with the Centers for Disease Control, with HRSA, many conversations with the Secretary of the Department, Javier Becerra. He has dispatched his deputy to be with us today and to share some remarks with us. So Urban Leaguers, give an Urban League welcome to Andrea Palm, the Deputy Secretary of the Department of Health.
Often I get music like that when I am proceeding to the stage. I'm gonna request it. My staff is still in the room. I'm requesting this for all future speeches. I really want to express my appreciation for the invitation today. It was such a treat to be a witness to the celebration. Mark's tenure and service, his tremendous leadership, and then my colleague from the Department of Commerce, and the surprise award to staff. I appreciate, as a deputy secretary, the critical shoulders that we all stand on in our organizations for the staff that are really doing all of the important work that allows us to do things like this. And so just really my appreciation, what a treat it is for me to see you all celebrate successes and leaders in your organization. Mark mentioned health equity and the launch of a health equity program with you all. I will tell you, as somebody who also is serving a second tour of duty, at HHS, I served all 8 years in the Obama administration, and I'm proud to return in this administration. And the focus on equity and on health equity is so new, and it's so different this time, I will say, and it is such a refreshing way to think about the work that we do, and that it is not something that we're sort of retrofitting onto programs as we go, but that we are thinking about it on the front end, and that we're baking it into the work so that equity is not a program or an office that sits over here, but it is a way of doing business, and it is a way of thinking about the people that we serve and how we put them at the center of all that we do. And so while we do things called equity programs, and we do initiatives in this space, it is a way of doing business that I really am proud to be a part of, and so appreciate the recognition of this effort, but really want to say from the top of my organization and from the leadership in the White House that this is that we are thinking about equity in a very different way, and insisting on its being built into the business of government moving forward in ways that we hope outlast us, outlive us, and are there. If I'm fortunate enough to have a third term, that I will be able to recognize it when I return. So I think that's an important distinction and difference in the way that we are looking at this work. I want to talk about a couple of things. You've heard from my colleagues. I certainly learned some new things this morning from my colleagues, but I'm going to talk about, I think, three big things, recognizing that we do equity in everything that we do, but I want to talk about a couple of priorities and things that we are working on in places where we hope to continue to do work with you moving forward. And one of those uniquely is in the space of behavioral health. Mark mentioned HRSA. We have SAMHSA, the Substance Use Mental Health Services Administration. We have CMS, our Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, ACF, the Administration for Children and Families. All of these places and programs and initiatives intersect with similar families. The overlap in the people that we serve is considerable. And so when you think about something like behavioral health, we think about how we integrate it into the healthcare system, how we put people at the center of the work that we do, how we leverage all of our programs across the department to better serve the American people. And we're doing a number of things in that space that we hope are visible at the community level, and that if they're not, you are raising your hand and helping us do them better. But we have invested $2.5 billion in what we call the Community Behavioral Health Centers, which is an effort to really bring comprehensive mental and substance use disorder services to communities across this country. We have taken another turn of the crank on our opioid overdose prevention strategy. We have expanded it beyond opioids, and we have brought a frame of harm reduction, recognizing that in the continuum of prevention to recovery, there is an important component of harm reduction while we work with and within communities as people make the decision about whether they are ready to enter treatment. There are ways to ensure that they are safer in the meantime, and that's an important component of the work we need to do. We also did a very big piece of business in transitioning our National Suicide Prevention Hotline from a 10-digit number to the simple 988 number. We have, through that capacity building, through that transition, invested and have been able to serve over the last year a call load that is 57% higher than it was previously, with reduced times to answer. We have expanded the text capacity. I am also of that generation where I don't understand what it means not to talk on the phone, but apparently the kids don't like to talk on the phone. And so we have expanded our text capacity by 1,600%, and recognizing what we are seeing coming out of the CDC and other places about the state of mental health of our adolescents, particularly our adolescent girls, and recognizing that we need to be part of the solution. We have to be there when they text us, and so that the expansion of that capacity is a really critical part of our partnership with communities and families around adolescent behavioral health. And we really do recognize and understand the workforce challenges that communities all across this country are facing in healthcare, in home and community-based services, in behavioral health, and are working to do things that we have never done before, including recruiting behavioral health workers and establishing partnerships with historically Black colleges and universities, and expanding our minority fellowship programs across the department so that we are a place that helps train the next generation of workers, so that folks are comfortable when they seek services because they have the option to seek care with someone who looks like them. These are really important efforts that, again, are baked into the broader work that we are doing, but are really critical to us being successful at putting the people we serve at the center of what we do. I'd like to talk a little bit about maternal health. Again, a critical issue, but one that has really important equity considerations. We have expanded maternal and postpartum care through the Medicaid program, really in an effort to improve the health of moms and babies. It's a really it's shameful that this is the state of healthcare in this country, and it obviously is especially important for Black women who suffer pregnancy-related deaths, regardless of their income levels, at a rate that is 3 times higher than white mothers, and for their infants who are 2.4 times, they have 2.4 times the infant mortality of white babies. Again, not a legacy that we are interested in leaving, and are very focused on being a part of fixing. So we have offered states the opportunity to expand their Medicaid coverage. Currently, 60 days postpartum is where eligibility for Medicaid sits. We have provided states with the opportunity to extend that for a full year postpartum. And I think significantly, 28 states have taken up that option. We encourage additional states to follow suit, but concretely, that is 439,000 women who have access to postpartum coverage because of Medicaid. That and other areas in the maternal health space, we continue to focus, again, so that this is not the legacy we leave. The Affordable Care Act, one of the really most important things I have had the privilege of working on in my career. We had a record enrollment period this year, 16 million people. Some of my colleagues mentioned the large legislative legacy of this agenda, those 4 big bills that we got done in the first 2 years. One of those, the Inflation Reduction Act, included enhancement of subsidies for the Affordable Care Act, such that 4 out of 5 people could find Affordable Care Act coverage on the marketplace for $10 or less a month. A significant savings, about $800 per year for a family who was able to access Affordable Care Act coverage. I think that those subsidies and their enhancement and our work to make them permanent is a critical part of supporting families to have access to the health and well-being that they need moving forward. So that's one less thing, right, that they have to worry about in the scheme of the bills they're trying to pay on a monthly basis. To that end, we've talked about the coronavirus a little bit. I would recognize and appreciate the partnership that you all had at the local level, supporting your communities at a time when, we didn't know at the beginning, right, what this was, what the impacts were, what the effects were going to be. And it wasn't until we had a vaccine that we had really great tools to combat it. And so it was community organizations, it was public health on the ground, it was people doing hand-to-hand comment on a daily basis that really is the story, I think, of this pandemic. But we have work to do as we are coming out the other side. We've talked about behavioral health. There are lingering things there. But the actual nuts and bolts of this government and states unwinding from a public health emergency, flexibilities, new streams of money, different ways of doing business that will return to pre-pandemic ways, all of government is sorting through all of those things. Telemedicine, right? We all surged into telehealth. Some of that will remain, some of that will recede. How do you decide which are the right things to keep, which things go away? How do we go back to business as usual, taking the lessons, incorporating them permanently into government, but then moving back to usual business in other places? And one of those places is in continuous coverage for Medicaid. The public health emergency allowed us to keep everybody on coverage, that we weren't going to do redeterminations for eligibility in the middle of this crisis, right? It made really good sense. Congress decided as part of the omnibus that we needed to start unwinding and we needed to start doing the redeterminations for eligibility. This is a big piece of business for the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services and all state Medicaid agencies. And we want to make sure in partnership with you and with states that we are minimizing coverage losses for people who continue to be eligible for coverage. It's been a long time since maybe the local Medicaid agency has talked to this family. How do we make sure we still have the current address for them? We don't want them to fall off coverage just because we're not sure where they are anymore. How do we leverage different sets of data so that we have good contact information? How are we partnering with community organizations who have direct contacts and links to these families to help us make sure that nobody falls through the cracks? So I think as you are engaging with your states, with your community, other community organizations, starting in April, starting now, people are sending out, state Medicaid agencies are sending out notifications that this process is going to start and people are going to need to come back in and be redetermined as eligible or moved into other coverage. So how we work together, how we minimize coverage losses, how we do the warm handoffs if Medicaid is no longer an eligible service for a family. What about an ACA plan for $10 or less a month? How do we make sure we minimize coverage losses so people have access to the primary care, to the prevention, to the specialty care that they need to stay healthy and well. And we are very anxious to partner with you all as we move this big piece of work forward, again, to make sure we are minimizing the folks who fall through the cracks. So if that is work that you are engaged in already, thank you. If it is not, please make sure that either we are connecting you with the right people or that you are helping us know who else we need to be in touch with to do this work better. CMS has been very focused on this for at least a year now, but we know we need your guidance and your expertise and your partnership to really get all of this right. So again, an ask from us as we partner together moving forward, help us help you minimize the potential for coverage loss as a result of redeterminations. So I, again, want to really appreciate the invitation here today. I think I might be the thing that is standing between you and the work that you need to do for the rest of the day. But again, my appreciation, greetings from Secretary Becerra and our continued commitment to work in partnership with you to do the work that is necessary to ensure that all the people that we serve together have the best leg up to live their best lives and be healthy and well in doing so. Thank you so very much.
So let's give her another round of applause. And this is a working session. So one thing I heard is that Congress has mandated redetermination of Medicaid eligibility. Think about what that means. You've been on Medicaid maybe for some time. Now, all of a sudden, you got to go through a little bit of a paperwork process and fill out some forms and give some information and then sit and wait and hope that what? You're not kicked off the rolls. Now, in some places, you have great favorability from some states to ensuring that as many people who should have this insurance have it. In some other states, there's been a deep hostility to this program from its inception, including states when offered the opportunity to expand eligibility, when offered the chance for the federal government to pay 90%, they said, no, we don't want it. Texas. So we know that this re-eligibility determination means that people in the community are going to come where? To the looking for help and information. So we understand that. That's our role. So, Madam Deputy Secretary, I think it would be helpful if the department might work with us to convene for our affiliate leaders an information session. We could do it by Zoom that would outline and lay out how this process is going to work, what happens, and what will people do, and what are the time periods, and what paperwork are they going to need, and what the appeal process is, so that there is not confusion and therefore people being hurt unintentionally. I think that would be a positive thing for the department to do in a very organized fashion. I think it should happen with the Urban League movement, but I do think it should happen with many, many nonprofit, community-based partners. I also believe that it should happen with local electeds, mayors, county executives, state legislators, because they, local electeds are where people go as well for help and assistance. And so we have to empower people, because this is I don't know when the last time this happened. Has this happened in a comprehensive way recently? No.
This will be the biggest bolus at one time, right? It is a usual process. Occasionally everybody's.
But all of a sudden this is happening all at once. So I'd like to work with you. We want to work with the department on this. We want to anticipate this. So I'm going to ask Morgan, are you in the room, Morgan? If Morgan's not in the room, Yvette's going to make sure. We're going to connect with you in order to do this. I think it's something that we could do, you know, indeed in the short run, and otherwise work with you. Number two, we heard it would be helpful.
I like staying after school.
See, we work, right? It would be helpful, I think, if we got an information sheet. You outlined some expansions in maternal health and some new opportunities, and we find that people in our community, there's sometimes an information deficit. And so we're an intermediary in between the community comes to us. We should be as well informed as possible. So if there is an information sheet of sort that sort of consolidates what you talked about today, which is the kinds of things we work for and we fight for, we can share it with our affiliates and our affiliate staffers. We can put it, we can place it electronically on affiliate websites, on the National Urban League's website, do some things in the social media space. We got to meet people where they are, and we have to inform them. This is like informing people of their health rights. You have eligibility. You have access to this program, or the insurance company can no longer do this to you. I know I get these copay letters, and I'm like, what? I'm asking everybody in my house, what's this for? I've got to be the person to figure out how to get them paid, but sometimes like, what is this? Why? Where did this number come from? I don't even understand this. And so even those of us who think we're sophisticated can be confused by the complexity of the system, and nothing creates more anxiety than one of these insurance denial letters, right? And you wonder, how am I going to handle this? Why did this happen? Did I do something wrong? Or et cetera. So imagine for the people we serve, and Medicaid is a vital program that the Affordable Care Act expanded its eligibility, and then in the pandemic, eligibility was expanded, and now it's being throttled back. You know, and we don't necessarily support that. We understand that, but Medicaid has been essential to the effort to close health disparities in this nation and in this country. So I wanted to just outline those as two takeaways, because we have people come here, we hear what they say, we have to use this to develop our next steps so we can do our work. So we're going to give you a big round of applause. That's our partnership going forward, and our team will be in touch. But thank you very much, and thank you to the department for all of the work that we've been able to do together. And we've built, and I'll just say this, 40 of our colleagues here are involved in this broad all-in campaign that we've stood up. And we've built a network of health navigators and healthcare counselors. We don't want that to go away. We want to keep that in place because it can do more than and go beyond the work we've been doing around COVID response. It can do a range of things, right, colleagues? We have infrastructure. We have now people who are seasoned and trained. We have to keep that in place. We have to keep that system and that structure in place, and a continued partnership with the department. But we want you and the secretary and everyone to understand how impactful the partnership has been and the possibilities to do more with what we've had. So let's give the Deputy Secretary a round of applause, and we'll be working together. Thank you so much. before we close out, I'm going to bring Rhonda Spears-Bell up. Rhonda's going to talk to us about the remainder of the day, what's in store, and what we have. We're just beginning with this conversation, colleagues. I'll see you around during the remainder of the day, so give Rhonda your attention for 5 minutes as we talk about next steps for the remainder of the day. Thank you.
Good afternoon, and thank you so much. Did you enjoy today's session? I know that was a lot of information, but that was so powerful and so impactful. And we'd just like to thank all of you, everyone here and online, for joining us for this session and the discussion. We will continue the pathway to prosperity. Looking forward, very quickly at 11 o'clock, right after this, our policy and advocacy sessions begin. We have a session at 11 called Protecting Black Women's Health. Give it up. Pathways and Barriers to Generational Wealth. We have a small business session, new and innovative ways for small businesses to access capital. So we have a lot of sessions, great speakers in store for you. This conference was planned with you in mind. And at 1 o'clock, don't miss the Empowerment Luncheon. We're talking about the state of our democracy. And that ballroom is actually right across from this room. Thank you so much for joining us. Have a great rest of the conference.